My son invited the entire family to celebrate his promotion at the most expensive restaurant in town. Everyone except me. My daughter-in-law stood near the hallway mirror fixing her earrings when she looked at me and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind people use when they want to sound polite while insulting you. "Don't forget to finish the leftovers in the fridge before they spoil," she said casually. I nodded. Okay. That was my favorite word back then. Okay, a small word people use when they are tired of fighting. What Daniel and Vanessa didn't know was that 30 minutes later, after they left for their celebration dinner, I would quietly walk upstairs, pack my bags, write one final letter, and disappear from their lives forever. And when they came home that night and discovered what I had done, their perfect little world collapsed. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. I always read the comments because stories like this remind us we're never truly alone. My name is Richard Holloway. I'm 64 years old, and for 5 years I lived like a servant inside the same house I spent 40 years paying for. The strange thing about disrespect is that it rarely begins with cruelty. It begins with comfort. People slowly get comfortable taking from you, comfortable speaking over you, comfortable forgetting your sacrifices, until one day they no longer see you as a person, only as a convenience. That Tuesday evening started like every other evening in that house. I was sitting in the living room reading the newspaper while the television played quietly in the background. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary because I had spent the afternoon cooking Daniel's favorite roast chicken. I still cook dinner every night. Not because I had to, because somewhere deep inside me, I kept hoping food could hold the family together. At exactly 5:42 p.m., the front door burst open. "Dad!" Daniel shouted excitedly. I looked up and immediately saw the grin on his face, the same grin he used to have as a child when he ran home with good grades. For one brief second, my heart felt full again. "I got it," he said. I stood quickly. "What happened?" "The promotion, Senior Operations Director." I smiled instantly. "That's incredible, son." And I meant it. No matter how distant we became, I never stopped loving him. I hugged him. He hugged me back, but only for a second. Then he pulled away and grabbed his phone. Vanessa entered behind him carrying shopping bags from expensive stores downtown. She barely acknowledged me. That had become normal. Daniel started making calls immediately. "We're celebrating tonight," he announced while texting several people at once. "Reservation at Bella Rosa, 7:30. Bella Rosa. The name hit me hard. That restaurant mattered to our family. My late wife, Eleanor, loved it there. Every anniversary, we sat near the same window overlooking the river. After she died, I hadn't gone back once. But hearing Daniel say the name made something warm rise inside my chest. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe this was finally a family celebration again. Maybe I'd sit at that same table and tell stories about Eleanor. Maybe for one evening I wouldn't feel invisible. I folded my newspaper and stood up. "I should probably shower before we leave," I said. That's when Vanessa looked at me. Actually looked at me. And instantly I felt the air change. "Oh, Richard," she said softly, "you don't need to get ready." I frowned. "I'm sorry," she smiled politely. "This dinner is really for close family." I stared at her, confused. I am close family. Her expression tightened for just a moment before relaxing again. "You know what I mean. Daniel's support system. The people helping him build his future." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were loud, because they were calm, carefully chosen. Cruelty delivered politely always cuts deepest. I turned toward my son. Surely he would say something. Surely he would laugh awkwardly and correct her. But Daniel just kept typing on his phone. He heard every word and said nothing. That silence hurt more than the insult itself. Vanessa walked toward the kitchen. "Oh, and there's chicken casserole in the fridge," she added casually. "You should eat that before it goes bad." I stood there frozen, in my own home, being told to eat leftovers while strangers celebrated my son's success at my wife's favorite restaurant. Something inside me cracked. Not loudly, quietly, like old glass under pressure. The worst part is, this wasn't new. That's what made it unbearable. 5 years earlier, after Eleanor died from cancer, Daniel and Vanessa moved in temporarily to help me. At least that's what they said. Temporary slowly became permanent, and somewhere along the way the house stopped feeling like mine. At first the changes were small. Vanessa rearranged furniture without asking. Then she replaced Eleanor's curtains. Then she started referring to the master bedroom as our room. I told myself it didn't matter. Families compromise, families adjust. But compromise slowly became surrender. I cooked every meal, handled every repair, paid most of the bills, cleaned the kitchen after parties I wasn't invited to attend. Sometimes I'd wake up early Saturday mornings and find long chore lists sitting on the counter in Vanessa's handwriting. Pick up dry cleaning, vacuum upstairs, mow lawn, buy groceries. Like I was an employee. One afternoon I overheard Vanessa talking to one of her friends on speakerphone. "Honestly," she laughed, "having Richard around makes life so much easier. He's basically our live-in caretaker. Caretaker, not father, not homeowner. Caretaker." I still remember standing in the hallway listening to those words while holding a laundry basket full of Daniel's shirts. And somehow I convinced myself not to be hurt. That's what lonely people do. They excuse behavior that would outrage them if it happened to someone else. Back in the present, Daniel finally looked up from his phone. "Mike and Allison are meeting us there," he said excitedly. Then he looked at Vanessa. "Did your parents confirm?" "They're already driving down." Her parents were invited, friends were invited, co-workers were invited, but not me. I suddenly felt exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that comes from swallowing disappointment for too long. Daniel ran upstairs to change clothes. Vanessa followed him. I remained alone in the kitchen. The casserole container sat inside the refrigerator with my name written across the lid in black marker, like I was living in some shared rental instead of the house I bought 40 years earlier. That's when the truth finally became impossible to ignore. I wasn't family anymore. I was useful. And there's a difference. An hour later they came downstairs dressed beautifully. Daniel wore the navy suit I bought him for Christmas. Vanessa wore a red designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. They looked happy, excited, completely comfortable leaving me behind. As they walked toward the door, Daniel shouted, "Don't wait up." Then they left. The house became silent. I stood alone in the kitchen listening to the sound of their car disappear into the rain. Then slowly, I walked upstairs, opened my closet, and pulled out 3 large suitcases, because what Daniel and Vanessa didn't know was that I had already sold the house. The decision to sell the house didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happened slowly, quietly, like water wearing down stone. By the time I finally packed my bags that night, a part of me had already been leaving for years. I carried the first suitcase downstairs and placed it near the front door. The house was completely silent now. No television, no laughter, no footsteps upstairs. Just the ticking of the old clock Eleanor bought from an antique store during our honeymoon. I stood there for a moment staring at it. Funny how clocks keep moving even when your life feels frozen. I walked back upstairs and opened the closet again. Most of my clothes were still neatly folded exactly the way Eleanor used to organize them. Even after 6 years, I never changed that system. Some habits become sacred after loss. As I packed sweaters into the second suitcase, memories kept surfacing without warning. Daniel at 8 years old running through the hallway wearing superhero pajamas. Eleanor laughing in the kitchen while dancing barefoot to old jazz records. Christmas mornings beside the fireplace. Birthday dinners. Family movie nights. Back then, this house felt alive. Warm, safe. Now it felt like a place where I quietly disappeared one piece at a time. I zipped the suitcase shut and sat on the edge of the bed. That's when my eyes drifted toward Eleanor's photograph on the nightstand. I picked it up carefully. She was smiling in the picture, soft brown hair moving in the wind during our trip to Maine years ago. Sometimes I still talk to that photograph. That night I whispered something I never thought I'd say. I can't stay here anymore. And somehow, saying it out loud, made the decision real. The truth is, after Eleanor died, I stopped fighting for space inside my own life. Grief does that to people. It weakens your boundaries, makes you tolerate things you normally never would. When Daniel first asked if he and Vanessa could stay temporarily, I agreed immediately. Part of me was relieved not to be alone in the house. The silence after a funeral is unbearable. You spend decades hearing another person breathe beside you, laugh beside you, live beside you. Then suddenly the house sounds empty in a way words can't explain. At first I appreciated having them there. Vanessa cooked dinner twice during their first month. Daniel checked on me constantly. They acted grateful. But slowly the balance shifted. Vanessa started criticizing small things. "Richard, you really should organize the garage." "Richard, this couch looks outdated." "Richard, nobody uses cable television anymore." At first I ignored it, then came the bigger changes. One afternoon I came home from grocery shopping and discovered Eleanor's favorite reading chair gone. Just gone. I found it sitting outside near the curb beside trash bags. My chest tightened immediately. "What happened to the chair?" I asked. Vanessa barely looked up from her laptop. "It didn't match the living room anymore." Didn't match. That chair was where Eleanor spent her final months reading books during chemotherapy. I walked outside and carried it back in myself. Vanessa rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. Daniel said nothing. That became the pattern. Vanessa pushed. Daniel stayed silent. And I swallowed the hurt because I was terrified of losing what little family I had left. People don't talk enough about loneliness after 60. How desperately some older parents cling to connection even when it hurts them. You start accepting disrespect because at least disrespect means someone is still around. A few months later came the dinner party. The moment I truly realized how invisible I had become. Daniel invited co-workers from his office. 8 people crowded around the dining table while I cooked in the kitchen for hours. Roasted chicken, garlic potatoes, fresh vegetables, homemade pie. Nobody offered to help. Nobody even asked. When dinner started, I sat quietly near the end of the table while Daniel talked proudly about work projects and promotions. One of his co-workers smiled at me politely. "So what do you do, Richard?" Before I could answer, Vanessa laughed. "Oh, he's retired. Mostly he just helps us around the house." Helps us around the house. I still remember those exact words. Not father, not homeowner, not the man who spent 40 years working at the electric company to build that life. Just someone who helped around the house. Everyone nodded casually. Then the conversation moved on without me. I sat there silently while people ate food I cooked inside the house I owned, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a guest in my own home. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood alone washing dishes while Daniel and Vanessa watched television upstairs. That's when I realized something painful. Nobody was forcing me into this role. I was allowing it. Because somewhere deep down, I believed enduring mistreatment was the price of keeping family close. A week after the dinner party, my doctor noticed I'd lost weight. My blood pressure was dangerously high. "Are things okay at home?" he asked carefully. I almost lied, almost smiled and said everything was fine. But exhaustion finally cracked something open inside me. So I told him the truth. Not all of it, just enough. Enough for him to quietly slide a business card across the desk. A lawyer. I stared at the card for almost 3 weeks before calling. Part of me felt ashamed. Ashamed that my own son had reduced me to seeking legal advice about my own home. But another part of me, the small part still capable of hope, needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. The lawyer's office was downtown in a small brick building beside a coffee shop. His name was Michael Chen. Younger than I expected. Calm voice, kind eyes. After listening to my story for nearly an hour, he leaned back in his chair and asked one simple question. "Richard, Why are you surrendering a house that legally belongs entirely to you? I blinked at him. What do you mean? The deed is solely in your name. Your son has no ownership rights. Something shifted inside me hearing those words, because for years I had behaved like I needed permission to exist inside my own life. Michael explained my finances carefully. The house was worth far more than I realized. My retirement savings were stable. Eleanor's insurance money remained mostly untouched. I wasn't trapped financially. I was trapped emotionally. That realization terrified me and freed me at the same time. Over the next several months, I secretly met with a realtor. I scheduled house showings while Daniel and Vanessa were at work. I told them I had doctor appointments. The house sold faster than expected. A young couple with 2 small children fell in love with Eleanor's garden. They talked excitedly about raising a family there. And strangely, that gave me peace. Because the house deserved warmth again, not resentment, not tension, not quiet humiliation. Back in the present, I carried the final suitcase downstairs and placed it beside the others. Then I walked into the kitchen. The casserole still sat inside the refrigerator, my name written across the lid in black marker. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I threw it straight into the trash. That small action felt bigger than it should have, like reclaiming something invisible. For the first time in years, I wasn't choosing silence. I sat at the kitchen table, pulled out a sheet of paper, and began writing the letter that would change all of our lives forever. I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the blank sheet of paper for almost 10 minutes before writing the first word. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from emotion. Because after years of silence, the truth feels heavy when it finally reaches the surface. Outside, rain continued tapping against the windows. Inside the house, everything was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I could almost imagine Eleanor standing beside the stove asking me what was wrong. For years, I kept my pain hidden from everyone, especially from myself. But that night, there was nowhere left to hide. I picked up the pen and finally started writing. Daniel and Vanessa, by the time you read this letter, I will be gone. The house has been sold. The new owners will arrive tomorrow morning. You need to remove your belongings before noon. I stopped for a moment after writing those lines. Even seeing the words on paper felt unreal. Part of me still expected Daniel to walk through the front door smiling and apologizing for everything. Part of me still wanted my son back. But another part finally understood something painful. You cannot force people to value you, no matter how much you sacrifice, no matter how much you love them. I continued writing slowly. For 5 years, I allowed myself to become invisible inside my own home. I cooked your meals, paid your bills, cleaned your messes, handled your responsibilities, and in return, I was treated like a burden instead of family. The hardest part was not Vanessa's behavior, it was Daniel's silence. That sentence hurt the most to write, because it was true. A stranger's disrespect wounds you once, but betrayal from your own child repeats itself every day. I looked around the kitchen while thinking about all the moments that led here. The holidays where I cooked entire dinners while eating alone afterward, the birthdays where I bought gifts but barely received conversation, the evenings spent cleaning wine glasses after parties I wasn't invited to sit through. One memory surfaced stronger than the others. 3 years earlier, I slipped on ice outside while shoveling snow from the driveway. I hit the ground hard enough to bruise my ribs. I remember lying there in pain while Vanessa stood near the front door annoyed because Daniel might be late for work. Not worried, annoyed. "Richard, can you get up?" she asked impatiently. "Daniel needs the car out." I never forgot that moment. Not because of the pain, because that was the first time I realized they no longer saw me as human, only useful. I returned to the letter. "Daniel, I spent my life trying to give you opportunities I never had. I worked overtime for years to pay for your education. Your mother and I sacrificed vacations, savings, and comfort so you could build a better future. We did it gladly because we loved you, but somewhere along the way you forgot that parents are human beings too. My vision blurred slightly while writing. I removed my glasses and rubbed my eyes. The truth is, leaving hurt more than I expected. People imagine freedom feels exciting immediately. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes freedom feels terrifying because pain becomes familiar after enough years, and familiar pain can feel safer than change. I folded my hands for a moment and stared at Eleanor's old cookie jar sitting in the center of the table. She bought it during a road trip through Tennessee 30 years earlier. Suddenly, I remembered something she once told me during Daniel's teenage years. "Richard," she said, "one day we have to teach him that love is not the same thing as entitlement." At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. Now I did. I continued writing. "I am not leaving because I hate you. I am leaving because I finally remembered I deserve peace too." That line nearly broke me, because after years of being treated like an obligation, I had almost forgotten my own worth completely. I explained that I purchased a small cottage in North Carolina. I explained that the sale of the house was final. Then I included one last thing. The apartment downtown is available if you need a place to stay temporarily. Rent will be your responsibility beginning next month. I stared at those words carefully. Part of me wondered if I was being too harsh, but another part remembered all the years they lived comfortably while I quietly carried every burden. Consequences are not cruelty. That's something many people never learn. I signed the letter slowly, then folded it neatly and placed it inside an envelope. For a long moment I just sat there staring at it. One envelope, one decision, one night capable of changing everything. Upstairs, the house remained silent. I checked the clock, 14 p.m. By now, Daniel and Vanessa were probably laughing at the restaurant, taking pictures, celebrating. Completely unaware their entire world was about to collapse. Strangely, I didn't feel revenge. I expected anger, satisfaction, something dramatic. Instead, I felt sadness, because no father dreams about walking away from his child. No parent imagines reaching a point where silence becomes healthier than staying. I stood slowly and walked through the house one final time. The living room looked completely different than it did when Eleanor was alive. Vanessa replaced the warm colors with cold gray furniture. Modern decorations, sharp edges, nothing personal, nothing soft. The house no longer carried our family's spirit. It looked like a showroom. As I walked upstairs, memories followed me everywhere. Daniel learning to ride a bicycle in the driveway. Eleanor singing while painting the hallway. Christmas lights hanging across the porch. For a moment, I almost lost my nerve. Almost convinced myself to stay, because starting over at 64 sounds terrifying. But then I remembered sitting alone in the kitchen while my own family celebrated without me, and suddenly leaving became easy again. I grabbed my coat, carried the suitcases outside one by one. The rain had stopped. Cold air filled the driveway. I loaded the final bag into the trunk and paused. The porch light glowed softly against the darkness. For decades, that light meant home. Now it simply meant history. I walked back inside one last time, placed the envelope in the center of the kitchen table beneath Eleanor's cookie jar. Then I stood there quietly looking around the empty room. "You were right," I whispered softly to Eleanor. "No one should have to beg for love." My throat tightened immediately. I turned off the kitchen light, locked the front door behind me, and slid the house keys into the mailbox for the realtor. Then I got inside my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. Because after years of living like a servant inside my own home, I was finally choosing myself. The highway was almost empty as I drove through the night. Rainwater reflected across the dark pavement while old songs played softly through the radio speakers. For the first hour, I kept expecting my phone to ring. Daniel always noticed problems eventually, usually too late. Sure enough, around midnight, the screen lit up with his name. I stared at it while the phone vibrated against the passenger seat. Part of me wanted to answer immediately, to hear my son's voice, to explain everything calmly. But another part of me knew exactly how the conversation would go. Shock, anger, blame, promises. And somehow, by the end of it, I would once again feel guilty for protecting myself. So I let the call ring until silence returned. A minute later, it rang again. Then again. By the fourth call, I finally switched the phone off completely. The silence afterward felt strange, uncomfortable at first, then peaceful. I drove another 3 hours before stopping at a small roadside diner just outside Tennessee. The waitress looked about 70 years old with silver hair tucked beneath a blue scarf. She smiled warmly while pouring coffee into my cup. "Long drive?" she asked. "Very long," I answered. "You moving somewhere or running away from somewhere?" The question caught me off guard. I laughed quietly for the first time in weeks. Maybe both. She nodded like she understood more than I said. Funny how strangers sometimes show more kindness in 30 seconds than family shows in years. I ordered eggs and toast and sat near the window watching trucks roll past the highway. For the first time in forever, nobody expected anything from me. Nobody needed bills paid. Nobody criticized how I spoke or what I cooked or where I sat. I was just another tired man drinking coffee at 2 a.m. And somehow, that felt freeing. Back in the car, exhaustion slowly settled into my bones. Years of stress were finally catching up with me. I rolled down the window and let cold mountain air hit my face to stay awake. Around sunrise, the mountains of North Carolina finally appeared in the distance. Blue, silent, endless. I pulled over near a scenic overlook and stepped outside. The sky glowed orange behind the hills while fog rolled across the valleys below. For a long moment, I just stood there breathing. No tension in my chest, no anxiety, no feeling of walking on eggshells inside my own life. Just quiet. I hadn't realized how exhausted my soul was until that moment. By 8:30 in the morning, I finally reached Asheville. The town looked exactly like Eleanor described years earlier when she researched retirement places online. Small cafes, tree-lined streets, local bookstores, artists selling paintings near sidewalks. It felt alive in a calm way. Not rushed, not cold, human. My new cottage sat near the edge of a peaceful neighborhood surrounded by trees. Small white fence. Tiny porch, blue shutters. Nothing luxurious. But it belonged entirely to me. I parked slowly in the driveway and stared at the house through the windshield. After everything that happened, after years of feeling unwanted inside my own home, seeing a place that represented peace nearly overwhelmed me emotionally. A woman from the neighboring house waved cheerfully while watering flowers. "You must be Richard," she called. I stepped out of the car. "Yes, ma'am." She walked over, smiling warmly. "I'm Helen. Welcome to the neighborhood." No suspicion, no fake politeness, just genuine kindness. I almost forgot what that sounded like. "Thank you," I replied softly. "If you need anything, I'm right next door," she said. "People around here look out for each other." That sentence hit harder than she probably intended. People around here look out for each other. Simple words. But after 5 years of emotional isolation, they felt enormous. Inside the cottage, sunlight poured through the windows. The previous owners left basic furniture behind exactly as promised. Small wooden dining table, old bookshelf, comfortable couch near the fireplace. Nothing expensive, nothing fancy, but it felt peaceful. I carried my suitcases inside slowly and placed them near the bedroom. Then I walked straight to the kitchen window. The mountain view stretched endlessly across the distance. Eleanor would have loved this place. That thought hurt and healed me at the same time. I made coffee and sat quietly at the table. For the first time in years, silence no longer felt lonely. It felt safe. Around 10 in the morning, I finally turned my phone back on. The screen exploded instantly. 23 missed calls, 15 voicemails, several text messages, most from Daniel, a few from Vanessa. I closed my eyes briefly before listening to the first voicemail. "Dad, where are you?" Daniel's voice sounded panicked. "There are strangers at the house saying they bought it. Call me immediately." Second voicemail. Dad, what is this? This isn't funny. Third voicemail. Anger. What the hell were you thinking? Fourth voicemail. Fear. Please answer. By the seventh message, I could hear Vanessa screaming in the background. I deleted the voicemail halfway through. Then another. Then another. Eventually, I stopped listening entirely, because for the first time in years, their emotional chaos no longer controlled me. I blocked Vanessa's number first. That decision took exactly 2 seconds. Blocking Daniel hurt more. My thumb hovered over the screen for nearly a minute. But finally, I pressed it. Then I placed the phone face down on the table and stared out toward the mountains again. No guilt, no panic, just exhaustion slowly leaving my body. The next few days passed quietly. I unpacked clothes, bought groceries, walked through downtown Asheville. Nobody here knew me as the tired old man constantly cleaning behind ungrateful family members. Here I was simply Richard. One afternoon I visited a small bookstore downtown. The owner, an older man named Walter, recommended 3 mystery novels and invited me to join their weekly reading group. Another small act of kindness from strangers. Life kept surprising me that way. By the 4th day, I finally slept through the entire night without waking up anxious. No footsteps upstairs. No tension. No waiting for criticism. I woke naturally at 7 in the morning feeling lighter than I had in years. That's when Helen knocked gently on my front door. I hope I'm not bothering you, she said. But there's a young man driving around the neighborhood asking for someone named Richard. My stomach tightened immediately. Daniel. He seemed worried. She continued carefully. I didn't tell him anything. Thank you, I said quietly. She studied my face gently. Family problems? I smiled weakly. Something like that. Helen nodded slowly, then she said something I never forgot. Sometimes peace feels unfamiliar when you've spent too long surviving chaos. After she left, I sat alone thinking about those words. She was right. For years, I confused suffering with loyalty. I thought enduring disrespect made me a good father, but real love should not require self-destruction. That afternoon, I finally sent Daniel one text message. I'm safe. Please respect my decision. His reply came less than a minute later. Dad, please, I'm sorry. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed carefully. You needed a father when life was comfortable. Now you need one because life became difficult. There's a difference. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, his message came through, I understand. For the first time in years, I believed he actually might. For weeks after that message, Daniel didn't contact me again, and honestly, I was grateful, because healing requires silence, sometimes not dramatic. Apologies, not emotional conversations, just distance long enough for your mind to remember what peace feels like. My new life slowly settled into routine morning coffee beside the kitchen window, walks through downtown Asheville quiet, evenings reading on the porch while the mountains disappeared into sunset shadows. Simple things, but after years of emotional exhaustion, simple things felt extraordinary. Started sleeping better, eating better. Even my doctor noticed the difference during my checkup. Your blood pressure dropped significantly, he said while reviewing my chart. Whatever changed in your life, keep doing it. If only he knew. The truth was, my body had spent years trapped in constant stress, always tense, always cautious, always preparing for criticism or conflict inside my own home. Once that pressure disappeared, it felt like my entire nervous system finally exhaled. A month later, Helen convinced me to attend a community gathering at a small local center downtown. I almost refused. After everything with Daniel and Vanessa, trusting people again felt difficult, but eventually I agreed. That single decision changed more than I expected. The center hosted events for retirees, local volunteers, and people who simply wanted connection. No judgment, no hidden expectations, just people trying to build meaningful lives. And I started volunteering twice a week, helping seniors organize finances and paperwork. Turns out 40 years handling electrical, contracts and budgeting made me surprisingly useful. But this time was different. People appreciated my help, respected. One afternoon after class, an older woman named Martha stopped me near the doorway. "You explain things kindly," she said. "Most people talk to seniors like we're children." That sentence stayed with me all evening because I understood exactly what she meant. There's something painful about growing older in a world that slowly stops seeing you as a full person. People begin speaking over you, ignoring you, managing you instead of respecting you. And if you're not careful, eventually you start believing you deserve. And that was the greatest damage Daniel and Vanessa caused. Not the chores, not the exclusion, not even the humiliation. It was making me forget my own value. 3 months into my new life, I received a handwritten letter from Daniel. Not a text, not a voicemail, an actual letter. I stared at the envelope for nearly an hour before opening it. His handwriting looked rushed and uneven, like someone writing late at night while struggling. "To say difficult things, Dad. I don't know if you'll read this completely, but I need to try. At first, I was angry after you left. I blamed you for everything. The apartment, my job stress, the house, all of it. But then something happened. Without you around doing everything, I started seeing how much you carried for us every single day. Cooking, cleaning, bills, repairs, groceries, everything. And the worst part is, I realized I barely thanked you once." I stopped, reading for a moment and closed my eyes, because hearing accountability from your child after years of disappointment creates complicated emotions. Part relief, part grief, part anger for how long it took. Continued reading slowly, "Vanessa, and I fight constantly now, without you there, absorbing all the tension. We're forced to actually face each other, and honestly, I think I finally understand what you were trying to survive all those years. Dad, I became weak. I let someone disrespect you because keeping peace felt easier than standing up for you. That makes me ashamed. I'm not asking you to come back. I know that's impossible. Now I just needed you to know I finally see it. I finally see you." That line nearly broke me. Finally see you. Do you know how painful it is for a parent to realize their child stopped seeing them years ago? I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside Eleanor's photograph. Then I sat quietly on the porch watching rain fall across the mountains. For a long time, I thought forgiveness meant reopening the same door repeatedly no matter how much pain waited behind it. But Asheville taught me something different. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. You can forgive someone without allowing them to hurt you again. That realization changed everything. Winter arrived gently in the mountains. Cold mornings, fog drifting across hills, fireplaces glowing through neighborhood windows. For the first time in years, the holidays felt peaceful instead of emotionally exhausting. No tension, no forced smiles at dinner tables where I felt invisible. Just quiet comfort. Helen invited me to Christmas dinner with her family. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want pity invitations, but when I arrived, something surprised me. Nobody treated me like a burden. Nobody ignored me. Her grandchildren asked questions about my life. Her daughter insisted I take extra pie home. At one point during dinner, everyone started laughing over an old family story while I sat there smiling quietly. And suddenly it hit me. This is what belonging feels like. Not obligation, not tolerance. Belonging. Later that night, I returned home emotionally overwhelmed, in the strangest way, because kindness after prolonged neglect feels almost shocking. Sat beside the fireplace staring at Eleanor's photograph again. "You were right," I whispered softly. "We should have left sooner." Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Eleanor had lived longer. Would Daniel still have changed this way? Would she have allowed Vanessa to push boundaries so far? Or would losing her eventually have broken me no matter what? I'll never know. But I do know this. Grief made me vulnerable. Loneliness made me tolerate disrespect. And fear of losing family nearly cost me myself completely. 6 months after arriving in Asheville, I received another unexpected phone call. This time I answered. "Dad?" Daniel's voice sounded quieter than I remembered, older somehow. Hi, Daniel. A long silence followed. Then finally he spoke. Vanessa left. I closed my eyes slowly. Part of me wasn't surprised at all. She moved back to California with her parents. He continued. Said she was tired of struggling. I listened quietly. I lost my promotion too, he admitted. Everything kind of collapsed after you left. For a moment, guilt tried creeping back into my chest, old habits, old conditioning. But then I remembered something important. Adults are responsible for their own choices, even when those choices have painful consequences. I'm sorry things are difficult, I said honestly, but Dad, his voice cracked slightly. I think losing you was the first real consequence I've ever faced. That sentence hung heavily between us, because deep down, I knew it was true. For too many years, I protected him from accountability, paid bills, solved problems, absorbed disrespect, and in doing so, I accidentally helped create the very behavior that eventually destroyed our relationship. I loved you too much to let you fail, I said quietly, and maybe that was my mistake. Daniel cried softly on the other end of the line, not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet crying of someone finally facing himself. Honestly and strangely, for the first time in years, I felt compassion without surrendering my boundaries. That was growth for both of us, Daniel. And I stayed on the phone for nearly an hour that night, not arguing, not blaming each other, just talking honestly. For the first time in years, he told me about the divorce, about losing his promotion, about sitting alone in that tiny apartment, realizing how much of his life had depended on me quietly holding everything together behind the scenes. I thought success meant building my own life, he admitted quietly. But somewhere along the way, I stopped valuing the people who helped me build it. I listened without interrupting. Because real regret sounds different from guilt. Guilt wants relief. Regret wants growth. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed my son was finally growing. Dad, he said carefully, I know I can't fix the past. I know I don't deserve another chance automatically. But I want you to know something. What's that? You leaving saved me. The words caught me completely off guard. What do you mean? If you had stayed, he continued, I would have kept living exactly the same way, comfortable, selfish, blind, losing. You forced me to finally look at myself honestly. I stared out the kitchen window toward the dark mountains while his words settled into my chest. Funny how sometimes the hardest thing you do for someone becomes the thing that helps them most. After we ended the call, I didn't feel sadness. I felt peace. Not because everything was magically repaired, but because I finally understood something important. Love does not require losing yourself. For years, I confused sacrifice with love. I thought being a good father meant enduring anything silently. But real love needs dignity too. Without dignity, love slowly turns into resentment, and resentment destroys families from the inside out. The following spring, Daniel visited Asheville alone. No demands, no expectations, no emotional pressure. He simply asked if we could have lunch together. Almost said no. Part of me still feared reopening old wounds, but another part recognized something different in him now, humility. So I agreed. We met at a small barbecue restaurant downtown. When I first saw him walking toward me, my chest tightened unexpectedly. He looked older. Life had finally touched him in ways comfort once protected him from. But there was softness in his expression now that hadn't been there for years. Hi. Dad, he said quietly. Hi, son. For a few awkward seconds, neither of us knew what to do. Then Daniel stepped forward carefully and hugged me, not the quick, distracted hugs from the past, a real one, the kind filled with apology words cannot fully express. We sat near the window talking for hours. Not about blame, not about Vanessa, not even about the house. We talked about life, about Eleanor, about regrets, about fear, about getting older. At one point, Daniel looked down at his hands and asked softly, Did Mom know? Know what? That I was becoming this kind of person? The question hurt because I had asked myself the same thing many nights. Took a slow breath before answering. Your mother believed people could lose their way without being lost forever. His eyes filled slightly with tears. She always knew exactly what to say. Yes, I smiled faintly. She usually did. Before leaving, Daniel handed me a small envelope. What's this? I asked. Open it later. That evening back home, I sat on the porch while sunset painted the mountains gold and opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a photograph. Old one. Daniel at age 10 standing beside me near a lake holding his first fishing rod, both of us smiling proudly. On the back, he had written, "Thank you for teaching me how to become a man. I'm sorry it took me this long to understand what kind of man I should have been." Read those words 3 times, then quietly place the photograph beside Eleanor's picture on the shelf. Months passed, life continued gently. Daniel and I started speaking, occasionally slowly, carefully, like rebuilding a bridge one piece at a time. Some wounds heal loudly, others heal quietly through consistency, through effort, through changed behavior, instead of dramatic speeches. Then one afternoon, Daniel called with unexpected news. "Dad," he said nervously, "I wanted to tell you before anyone else." "What happened?" There was a pause, then his voice softened. "I'm going to be a father." For a moment I couldn't speak. Emotion hit me harder than expected. "Grandchild, a new beginning. I wanted to ask something." Daniel continued carefully. "When the baby comes, would you be willing to be part of their life?" I looked around my little cottage, the peaceful rooms, the mountain view, the quiet life I rebuilt from nothing, and suddenly I realized something beautiful. Leaving my old life didn't destroy my family forever. It simply changed the conditions required to remain part of it. "I'd like that," I answered softly. Months later, when my granddaughter was finally born, Daniel sent me the first picture from the hospital. Tiny hands, tiny face, wrapped in a pink blanket. Underneath the photo was one simple message. "Her middle name is Eleanor," I cried that night, not from sadness, from gratitude, because despite everything we lost, something good still survived. A few weeks later, I finally held my granddaughter for the first time. Daniel stood beside me quietly while I rocked her gently in my arms. And for a moment, life felt strangely complete, not perfect, never perfect, but honest, healthy, real. As I looked down at that little girl, I silently promised myself something: she would never grow up believing love meant control or guilt or silent sacrifice. She would know respect, kindness, boundaries, and the courage to walk away from people who forget her value, even family, especially family. Now, sitting here on my porch 2 years after leaving that house behind, I sometimes think about the man I used to be, the exhausted man eating leftovers alone, while his family celebrated without him. I barely recognize him anymore, because that man believed his worth depended on how much pain he could tolerate for others. But this version of me understands something different. Peace is not selfish. Boundaries are not cruelty, and sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is finally choose themselves. So if you're listening to this story while feeling invisible inside your own life, hear me carefully. Love should never require you to disappear, and the moment you remember your own worth, everything can change.